Live. Sorry for, I think I'm like 5 minutes late to my own like pushing it back 15 minutes timeline. But I actually have updated slides this month, so yay for that. Uh, all right, welcome everyone to IGDA Twin Cities. Thanks, Peter. All right. I have to have this in the foreground so I can actually change the slides. Um, this is our rough schedule. I meant to be showing this for the last 15 minutes. Wah wah. Or I guess 20 minutes now. Oh well, we didn't really do that. One notable thing here is that the bottom lower left-hand corner, that's the URL for these slides, so you can always open that up and follow along if you want, or at the end you can see like past month's slides as well. Welcome everyone. Our meeting is meant to be open to everybody. We also aim to be a safe and inclusive community, so we have a safe arcade policy, like a code of conduct, which I guess applies to the Twitch chat. Usually it's our in-person meetings, and usually those are at the nerdery, but I guess it's been, gosh, how many months has it been now? Like 4 or 5 months since we've had that. But yeah, so we're very thankful for them as a sponsor when that's true, when that's a thing. And welcome to everyone. Here is our board. This is a relatively new thing, but essentially these are the people that make this thing happen. So I generally organize speakers. Not doing a great job of that lately, but yeah, that's what I'm doing, I guess. And all these other people help out as well in a lot of different ways. So thanks to everybody. In particular, we have Mark is sort of backstage tonight. He's kind of managing folks in Discord. We added a new event to the calendar. I mentioned it last month, and if you've been following along on Twitch, you've probably seen that we were having these. But now we have 3 events happening every month until that stops being true. Currently, we have our main meeting. That's where you are right now. Every second Wednesday of the month, starting 6-ish, 6:15-ish, whatever. Currently located on Twitch. And next meeting, usually I would say what we have for next month, but I'm still looking for a speaker for next month. So if you got a topic you want to talk about, give me a shout, give me a ring, give me a direct message. I guess that's more accurate, or email. Email works too. So then we've got the Twin Cities Playtest event, and that's the 3rd Wednesday of the month, so kind of the in-between month, or in-between week rather. And we'll hear a little bit more about, I don't know if we'll hear more about that. I do have a slide about it in a minute here. And then finally, last but not least, we have the MNVR and HCI meeting, the 4th Wednesday of the month. And that's been held the last few months in AltSpace, which is it's been kind of cool. Next meeting will actually be the 5th Wednesday, not the 4th. I guess July has 5 Wednesdays, so it's kind of a coin toss maybe, or there was a conflict. I can't say for sure. You'd have to ask Zach. Anyway, they'll be talking about online VR platforms. There's a big list of them, and I'm kind of excited. That sounds pretty cool. So AltSpace being one of the major online. Zach's birthday was the conflict. Oh, happy birthday, Zach. Yeah, okay. So, yeah, online platforms. Sounds cool. Here's a picture from, this is a few months back in AltSpace. There's a bunch of folks here. I think I'm maybe the one in the black hoodie. Not sure. But it's funny how, a bunch of us actually try to, as much as you can in AltSpace, create an avatar that looks kind of like you. Like, I don't think we have anyone that's. I guess there's maybe a couple robots in there. The Altspace lets you look like a robot also. So a little bit more about the Twin Cities playtest every Thursday. Like I said, there are 3 ways to participate. You can participate as an attendee and just watch on Twitch, commenting and all that jazz. If you are a playtester and you want to actually play some of the games, you can do that as well. You can just do it impromptu at the event, or you can contact them ahead. No need to download any software or anything, because they're using this magical parsec software, or as a developer. So if you have a game that you want to play test, contact Peter and send your build to Mark, presumably after talking to Peter, and they'll play your game on stream. And it's a cool way to get some great. Oh, you do have to download parsec. Just FYI. I'm sure we're all super adverse to downloading new software. I don't know why I said that. Okay, anyway, so that's being organized mostly, it looks like, on Discord, but I'm sure you can go into Slack and find those same folks if you want to, or email also works. So speaking of ways to contact us, there's a bunch of ways listed on our website. Here it is in its old school glory. We have a deadline now, or a plan anyway. We're going to update the website by next month at this time. So next month, this screenshot is going to be totally obsolete. We'll see. We'll see if that happens. But if anyway, on the website you can find this connect with us link at the top in the navigation, and there's a bunch of different ways you can contact us. Email's on here, I think. I hope. Yeah, maybe. I don't even know if it is. Maybe it's not. At least it's not in the screenshot. That's kind of a fun omission. The email is on this slide, though. So I'm not crazy. Anyway, if you're not in the MSP Gamedev Slack, that's probably like the best way to connect with local game developers currently in the Twin Cities. And it's a good time in there. It's a bunch of people chatting. So join us there. Like I said, we're looking for presenters for next month. It's not like I don't have any leads. I got some feelers out, but if you are interested in talking, please use those same ways to get a hold of us. Actually, really just email, or Slack isn't even on this slide. This slide is maybe, we have too many ways to get a hold of us. They're not kept in sync. We need to keep them in sync, maybe. Error 2000. I hope it's just you. I mean, I don't know. Can anyone still hear me? Is anyone out there? Who knows? I'm just talking into a screen. Okay, cool. Awesome. All right. We are a chapter of an international organization, the International Game Developers Association, and as such, there is the parent organization. They exist. You can become a member. You can have like I used to have carrying cards. I don't know if they still do anymore. There are benefits to becoming a member. If you do, you should tell them that we're your chapter, and that'd be great. The IGDA actually does have their own Twitch stream, and they've been doing some cool roundtable discussions. I don't know. They have programming as well. So if you're interested in game development in general, maybe you check their stream out as well. So this is obviously weird. Normally our events are in person, and they're at least 50% networking. For me anyway. And I do all the presenting. So not all the obviously I don't do all the presenting. I do all this BS at the beginning. So anyway, we're missing out on this networking stuff, and we're still trying to figure that out. Obviously, you can chat in the Twitch channel, stream, Twitch chat, I guess, chat in there. But obviously the Gamedev Slack and the Discord, and there are all kinds of ways you can connect to folks. So good luck with that. All right, we're kind of back on doing these plugs. We're gonna try this out. We're gonna see how this goes. I don't know. I mean, I didn't like explicitly say you needed to be in Discord if you submitted a plug. So if you're not there, that's fine, and we'll just show your slide. But I added the form field to submit like a plug just to everybody. So I think if you filled out the Eventbrite, you saw it, and we had a few more responses than usual. So I think that's an experiment that sort of worked. So in general, we do have this community calendar, icecold.games, where if you have an event coming up, you can post it on the event. I know there's 2DCon is coming up. I forget exactly when, and they are doing an online event. So that's a thing that I wanted to make a slide for, but I did not. Maybe somebody could post a link to 2DCon in the Twitch chat. That'd be cool. You should know about 2DCon. It's a great local gaming convention. It might be the biggest one now, outside of other cons that have gaming. Are probably significantly bigger, but the biggest one like specifically for games. Thanks, Beth. We got a plug for Magical Unicorn Quest. Andrew, I don't know if you're in Discord, but if you want to say a few words, you're welcome to chime in. I don't know how I would know if you did, so that's a thing. I guess. Yeah, let me just check the old Discord. No, not in Discord yet. Oh, but you're in Twitch, so cool. And I don't really know what to say about this, except that I did see on, I think it was in Facebook, I saw like some people, maybe it was on Twitter. It was either Facebook or Twitter. I saw some folks have the game now, so that's exciting, right? Like it's arriving in people's hands. This was a Kickstarter, I think last year, maybe. You can go to Flame Point Games and you can order it. $20. So, congratulations for that existing in the world. I'm gonna move on. I think, unless we wanna. Yeah, we can hover here for a minute. Let me go check Discord, because I don't really know either. I'm supposed to be in like some kind of lounge that I'm not in anymore. Here we go, the event stage. Now you'll hear beeps if people chat in here in the event stage. No one's in here but me, so who knows? Oh yeah. Cool. Nice. I think it's Mark posting as IGDATC, so it's cool. Okay, uh-oh. Now there's people showing up. Oh boy.
Hello. I don't know if it's our turn to do the slide.
It's not yet.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll just mute myself then.
Yeah, alright, cool. That was Steven. But first we have Will, who just wanted to let everybody know about the low-res game jam. Uh-oh. This isn't working. I'm just gonna go ahead and mute Discord for now. So this is just a game jam that's organized online. It's all online. Looks pretty cool. The one rule is that your game has to be 64 by 64 pixels or less. You could do 32 by 32, or like 5 by 5. I don't know. That'd be kind of a fun constraint. Anyway, it starts. It started. I think started would be the correct term. July 1st, but you have until August 16th, so kind of a long time as game jams go. And it sounds like at least Will is is taking part. So if I think there's definitely a Game Jams channel. I forget what it's called in Slack, but there's probably one in Discord maybe. I don't know. There's so many things in Discord. I don't know. But if you wanted to, take part in that, let people know. We also got a plug from Dylan Myers, who's a composer and sound designer. You can go to his website to listen to his work, and I should have loaded that up ahead. but he's in particular, he wanted to highlight this rescore he did of the Super Smash Brothers trailer. I debate whether we should listen. We could it's like a couple minutes. Let's listen to a clip. I don't know. We don't need to listen to the whole thing. I feel. Awesome. I let it play. Hope that was good. I enjoyed it, so hope you did too. Yeah, thanks, Dylan. If you are looking for a composer, maybe he's your man. I know Steven wanted to talk about nicegames.club. Let me find Steven in Discord.
Oh, right, it's delayed. Hold on.
Hello.
Forgot to mute the forgot to mute the Twitch stream. Hi everyone. I am Stephen McGregor of Nice Games Club fame. And
I'm Ellen. I'm also here. Hi, I'm Ellen Burns Johnson. I'm a new host. Hello.
Yay.
Yeah, we're glad to be here. We just wanted to talk about Nice Games Club. It is a podcast that we record here locally, and also Mark LaCroix, who's running this stream, is also in it. Those are all three of our faces on the screen. You can see us. And
my face is actually kind of like covering yours a bit, and I apologize for that.
Well, that's okay. Martin is not on the podcast, or at least it hasn't been yet.
I could make it almost all of your face.
It's all good. But yeah, we talk about game dev topics. We also have content such as a game jam where we make a game over an hour, or we design a game. We don't actually make it over an hour. And stuff. Ellen, do you have something you want to say too?
Sometimes we sing.
Yes.
And it's fun. We have a good time.
Yeah.
It's a fun time making the show, and we sometimes have guests on that look at the industry in different ways and bring different perspectives, and it's a good thing. It's a good thing to podcast to. It's a good podcast to.
Yeah. So if you want to listen in, you could go to nicegames.club to hear our lovely voices once again.
And jokes.
And jokes.
And hear the jokes.
Yeah, actually, it's probably the jokes you're here for, not the voices. That's all I got to say, I think.
Wait, is that like 100 and... That's not 180.
Oh, yeah, we're running close to 200 at this point. We've been doing this for several years. Well, maybe not several. Over 3. Has it been 4? I don't think it's been 4 quite yet, but we're close.
Yeah, it's been a while, and I've only been along for the ride, and as a show host for a couple months now. But we are coming up on our 200th episode, and I feel like we should do something special, but we totally don't know what to do. So if you guys ever have ideas about what we should do for our 200th episode, we would love to hear it.
Yes.
So let us know.
Yeah, we're on all the social medias too. At Twitter at Nice Games Club. Our website. Do we have a thing where you can contact? There's places you can contact us at contact@nicegames.club too, through email. We're also on Facebook, but don't use Facebook. We just don't check it very frequently, I think. Cool. I don't. Do you have anything else you want to add, Ellen?
Yes, good point. The contact links are also behind Martin's head. So
that's what it is.
I can show them like a sliver of them. Oh no, I can't because they don't scroll.
Right? Well, it's at the top.
Well, just check out Nice Games.
Hey, yeah, love to have you listen and tell us what you think.
Yes.
Awesome. That's a staple. It's a Twin Cities staple. The nicegames.club podcast. Awesome. I will return to the slides. I am getting, or was getting, some errors in Discord, or not Discord, sorry, in Twitch. So I hope it's still all going, still all working. That was the end of the plugs. We wanted to just have this slide to let you know that, like, of course, you're welcome to plug stuff in the Twitch chat as well. Feel free to chat about stuff as the presenters are on, and it could be anything. It could be about the presenters. It could be about just local stuff. I know I saw at least one other cool thing plugged. There's like an XR Access hosting XR Symposium, some kind of XR symposium, all about accessibility in XR, which could be like VR or AR or all the R's. That sounds like a cool event. So I think without any sort of without any segue, I'm just going to get right into the presentation. So our first presenter tonight is Scott Lembcke, and I need to basically just connect with him on Discord. Let me do that. I'm going to start this call. You can all hear a bunch of dings. Let's see. Hey,
can you hear
Scott? Me? Yes, I can hear you. Can the stream hear you?
Yes. I actually have too many speakers on here. Let me switch.
Okay.
Maybe even more speakers on.
I am showing the wrong Discord window, so that's cool. Let me fix that.
Sorry about that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think it's the right one, and it was maybe. No? Oh, nope. Sorry, it was not the right one. I'm still fixing your stream. Sorry, Scott.
Is it streaming?
It is, but I need to fix which one I'm showing, like which window.
Okay, got it.
window I'm showing. I think this is the one. Here we go.
Hey, there we go. I see my thing.
Yeah, sweet. Okay, I will just step back and let you do your talk.
Okay, so this is sort of a fill-in presentation because there wasn't a speaker that was lined up, and I said that someone, Martin and Zach, had requested that might be interesting to talk about. So, fractals in video games. So fractals have been in video games for kind of a long time in some of the most boring ways, and one of the first instances of it was maybe the game Rescue on Fractals, which was basically just fractal landscapes that you'd fly around in, and it was like an 8-bit game for like Commodore 64 and Atari, the old Ataris. So, that sort of thing's been around a long time. Procedurally generated terrains, procedurally generated a lot of stuff. It's, that's a lot of that's technically is fractals, but it's not super interesting. More recently, there's been some more interesting games that are actually rendering 3-dimensional fractals that you can explore around in. One of them that I've been kind of watching for a while is this game that I have no idea how to pronounce the name of it. I'm going to go with Yodoma Globula, where it does ray marched fractals that you can kind of dive into like caves, and it looks kind of neat. And so that's new, but it's still sort of the same where it's, terrains and stuff. And more recently, someone had pointed out that there's this Marble Run game, which is kind of neat. Same thing, it's doing terrains. So while procedural generation is kind of, like an old hat in video games at this point, I thought it'd be more interesting to talk about what fractals can teach us about complexity and how we can use that when developing games. So some examples of simple fractals might include like the logistic map is one of the simplest ones, where it's this branching structure that branches over and over and over and over again until it branches, more often than you can move to the right, basically. And it creates this weird chaotic pattern that's, suddenly has these spots in it that are stable. And for what reason? Well, we're not really sure. It's interesting, though. Other simpler ones, there might be something like fractal trees or these fractal pyramids, like Sierpinski pyramid. So, and that's interesting. And you can kind of see that, like, okay, so the logistic map is a little more random, but, these bottom ones aren't so random. That's maybe not so interesting. So what exactly is the difference between these fractals, and how can we generate some of them? So, going to do some math. Fractals are based on math, but not necessarily complicated math. A lot of it's just arithmetic done over and over and over again, that you could have, someone who's had, their middle school arithmetic education use it. But it would just take them, their entire lifetime to render, like a little bit of the image for it. So most fractals are based on patterns that simple functions that are repeated over and over and over again. Each time you repeat the pattern or the function, it gets a little bit more detailed. And if you do that an infinite number of times, you have an infinitely detailed fractal. So some of the simplest ones are, for instance, here we're going to take a number z and we're going to turn it into a sequence so that we can plot it. And then we're just going to loop 200 times, and we're going to take z and square it and add it to the list, and then we're going to plot it. So if you look, well, if we start with 0, it just, 0 squared equals 0, 0 squared equals 0, on to infinity. So that's kind of boring. Well, if we put in a different number, we can get, it'll go to, let's do this. It'll stay at 1. So that's also interesting, maybe. But if we put a number that's less than 1, it'll go towards 0 and then, stay at 0, basically. That's also kind of boring. So let's forget about that. Let's just say z starts at 0, and instead we're going to add a little bit of a number to it, so like 0.1. And we can see that it starts at 0, moves up a bit, and then stays there. So it becomes stable. And if we give it a bigger number, say 0.2, same thing, but if we go to a different number, then it explodes, and it does this thing where it goes, up and up and up, and then if we make the window bigger here, we can see that it just kind of basically goes to infinity. Like, the numbers are gone, and it never comes back. So that's also not necessarily, or rather that's interesting. Some numbers work and some numbers explode. What's the difference? So we can try some other numbers here, maybe like a negative number, and see what happens. And that's also interesting. It's, converging towards a single point, but it goes back and forth. And trying a different number, we get different patterns where now it's oscillating between, different numbers, but it's stable and it'll do that forever. So at this point, let's just have it take a number. And so I'll control the number with the slider. So if we go up, we get stable numbers up to a certain point, and then it goes unstable. And if we go down, we get stable numbers up to a certain point. And then we get 2 numbers that it jumps between, and 4 numbers that it jumps between, and 8 numbers that it jumps between. And this is actually going to be really similar to what this logistic map fractal is doing, where it starts with just one value, and then it'll jump between 2 and then 4. And then you can see on the right, it gets more interesting if we keep going. So as I drag this further over to the left, it starts getting weird and chaotic, where it jumps around a lot, but it never goes to infinity. It stays finite the whole time. And if we keep increasing that number, we get these weird spots where suddenly it's not chaotic anymore. It's stable for some reason. And if we keep going, maybe we'll find another one right around 1.75. There we go. And then so there's another spot where it's just mysteriously stable, and if we keep going, then it goes unstable again. So that's kind of interesting, but needs more dimensions or something to it, right? So the way a lot of fractals do that is with complex numbers. And it says complex in it, but it's still just basic arithmetic. And what a complex number is it's going to be, a regular, it's going to be a regular number plus a number times the number I, the imaginary number. If you remember that from algebra. And the idea is that I is the square root of -1, which doesn't exist. It's imaginary. But if you square it, it equals -1. So then, sparing you the rest of the math, if you square a complex number, you're going to get a squared minus b squared, blah, blah, blah. And it just happens that's the same as a bunch of trig identities. And so there's a whole bunch of things with complex numbers that have to do with trig and angles. And that's a lot of math, blah, blah, blah. Let's do this visually instead. So if we start with the x and y plot here, the x is the real numbers, the numbers that we're used to, and the y-axis is then the imaginary part of the number. And so if I change the magnitude of this red number, like if I set it to 2, you'll see the blue number on the number line goes to 4. If I set it to 0, they both go to 0. If I make the red one negative, the other one goes positive because we're squaring it. So that's all kind of as expected. The interesting part is that there's this angular component to it, as suggested from the trigonometry part. And as hinted above, this is the double angle identity. So when you're squaring a complex number, you end up with a new one that's twice the angle of the old one, and you multiply the length. So if I set this to 45 degrees, I'll get 90 degrees for the output. If I set it, the red one to 90 degrees, I'll get 180 degrees. And this is kind of interesting to think of the way numbers work. If you multiply something by 1 repeatedly, it stays the same. If you multiply by -1 repeatedly, it keeps bouncing back between positive and negative. One way to think of that is a complex number. It just doesn't have an imaginary part to it, and it's rotating 180 degrees each time. I don't know if that makes it any easier to understand why that happens, but it's interesting, I thought. So now what happens if we take complex numbers and run them through basically that same equation? So we'll skip over some other code I entered in here for later. And so now instead of, we're running that same code as we did before, where we're squaring a number and adding a new value to it. If we go off axis a bit here, you can see when you get these numbers where it stabilizes on a single point. So you can kind of see this line is the progress of each time you multiply and add, it goes further and further down that spiral. And as we move that around, you can see we get different spirally shapes, and some of them are these interesting stable patterns, and some of them explode. and they go off to infinity. And as you move this around, you might notice that there's a weird pattern to like where they're stable and where they're not. It's not like a simple shape, and it turns out there's all sorts of interesting patterns you can get. Like, so depending on where you start, you'll get different shapes. Like you can find triangles and stars, and you can get more complicated. You'll find things like this double triangle where it's no matter how many times you iterate the equation, it stays stable. And you can get really complicated ones like this, where it's like a dozen points in here on this track that's practically repeating itself, but it stays stable no matter how many times you do it. And if you change one of these numbers by just one digit, like 1,000th of its value, and then it doesn't work. It doesn't stay stable. Oops, let's take away some numbers from that one. So if we do more iterations, then yeah, we'll eventually see that it goes off to infinity. And if you're guessing where I'm going with this, this is the equation for the Mandelbrot set. So the pixels that are highlighted in black are the values that stay finite when you repeat this equation, and the ones that are white are the ones that explode off to infinity. And why it makes this bizarre shape, this weird looking like bug, no one really knows. It's sort of just this weird pattern in math. And so like a lot of these points here, like when we picked the one that was way out here, there's this little tiny black dot there. And so if we hit the black dot, it stays stable. And if we go just outside of it, it's not. And so it might be interesting. Why was I looking at fractals? Well, so I'd written a multi-threaded job system that involved a smidge of assembly, and I wanted to test it. People who know me, this probably seems very predictable. Some guy doing something with assembly. And so I thought, what's the best way to test this? And so I wrote a fractal rendering program that was several times as large as the job system that it was built on top of to do fun things with fractals. So if I pull that up, we can render some fractals. So this is a higher resolution version of the Mandelbrot set, and so we can actually zoom in on this one. You can see when you zoom in, there's all these little dots that are themselves tiny little Mandelbrots. And so this is sort of what makes it a fractal, that there's like, at infinite scales, there's like tiny little pieces of it that resemble the whole thing. And, the really interesting thing might be that there's no end to this complexity. Like, the more you zoom in, the more these little tiny Mandelbrots there are going to be. And at this point, we've zoomed in enough. We're 10 to the 11th power, almost the 12th power now. If we'd started out with something that was the size of a human, like the original bug shape of the Mandelbrot, we'd be looking at a hydrogen atom right now. And, maybe it doesn't look like we've zoomed in that far, but we've zoomed in billions of times from the original, and there's still interesting things there to see. But one interesting thing to note is, it's just kind of this weird, like, speckly thing. There's these little Mandelbrots, but there's actually more to it than that. So if I make it draw, instead of just, drawing pixels that are on or off, let's kind of anti-alias it so we can kind of see parts that are smaller than pixels, so we can see more of what's going on with it. So now, this will highlight all the spots that we're missing. All this like furry stuff is bits that are, less than a pixel wide. So, then when you zoom in on this, you can see there's a ton of points on this that are valid and part of the Mandelbrot set, but they're just like practically infinitely small. And again, we can kind of like zoom in on this as much as we want, and there's more and more detail to it, which is, I think just fascinating that the equation for this was just take this complex number where all you need to do is like 3 or 4 multiplications and a couple additions, and you repeat the process tens of thousands of times, and you get this bizarre pattern. No matter where you zoom in on it, you're going to find, more of these little Mandelbrats, and they're going to be surrounded by more of the patterns that look like the patterns around it. So if we zoom in on this little spire with 5 things going off in each direction, it doesn't matter how much we go into it, we're always going to find spires with 5 edges to it. Or if we go over here, it's called the Elephant Valley, we're going to get these, elephant trunk-looking things, as they're kind of named. And as much as you zoom in on that, it's going to be more of the same. And so it's just this weird map of, if you see a feature, you can zoom in on it more, and all of the stuff near there is going to be self-similar and fractal-like, which I think is just kind of interesting. And another thing to potentially blow your mind is, so again, imagine this picture that you're seeing to be the size of the observable universe, everything that can see of the universe currently, at least. And we can zoom in and zoom in and zoom in and zoom in. And there's going to be this little Mandelbrot here, and we can zoom in near that and find something interesting. Let's try here. At some point, we're going to start losing precision because I'm using 128 bits. Yeah, there we go. I'm using 128-bit floating point numbers. So this isn't hardware accelerated for why it renders a little slow. But at the scale, those dots would be about the size of the planet Earth. So we went from something that's the size of the entire universe, and now we could see our planet. And the only reason why we can't zoom in and see the hydrogen atoms on our planet is because I didn't use math routines with high enough precision. We could go from the size of the universe down to molecules, or even the Planck length, which is the point at which our understanding of physics breaks down, and we don't understand what happens at levels smaller than that. And we can keep going, and we can zoom past that amount 10, 100, 1,000 times, and there's still more detail that exists in this image. So it's, in a way, it's infinitely more detailed than the actual universe that we live in, which I think is fascinating. And related to the Mandelbrot set is there's something called the Julia set. So if I pull up tab, something someone else made. So here's the Mandelbrot set. It's rendered in a different way than what I was doing. Instead of doing an anti-alias kind of look to it, it's showing you these color variations, and each time one of these color variations happens, it's a more and more stable number that exists in that area. So the black ones are the stable numbers, and so red is really unstable, orange is more stable, and the more you go in, the more stable those orbits that you end up with are. Let's turn up the number of iterations they're rendering with to make it more detailed. So you can find any spot on this fractal that you find interesting and ask for the Julia set of it, and it'll sort of transition between the two. Can't zoom in very far on this one because it's not using very high precision math. And as we zoom out on the same Julia set, now we're going to find out that, there's an entire fractal that looks exactly like that spot that we just zoomed in on. And we can do this process, a couple times, find somewhere else that's interesting. Like this nice spirally spot here, maybe. And if we view the Julia set for that one, it's going to, not look like it changes very much. And we're looking at the same place on a Julia set that's kind of centered on that point. And if we zoom out from there, so we have a fractal that looks like that spot. And the only difference between the Julia set and the Mandelbrot set is, if you remember back here in the math, where we were doing z squared plus c. Oops, where did it go? So z squared plus z was the equation that we were iterating. The Julia set, instead of starting at 0, starts at a number. And the number that it was picking in that other program I showed you was the location that we were looking at. So the Mandelbrot set is sort of like a map of all these Julia sets. And by taking something away, just saying, instead of having 2 numbers that we're putting in, we just put in 1 and we set this other one to 0, we made it more complicated, if that's, a little crazy. So, and I think that's sort of a lesson about, a lot of things, simplifying things can make it more interesting and more complex, or maybe more to the point, you don't need something to be complicated to generate something that is complicated. And that's how I'm going to wrap this up with, how does it relate to game development? If you want to make something amazing, you don't need to worry about all the details that maybe you can't put in yourself. Think of what you can take away to make the whole better and more complicated. And that's pretty much that. I hope someone found that interesting. I put it together in about 2 days. So
awesome. Thank you, Scott. I don't know if anyone has any questions for Scott. There's clapping in the channel. 2 days. Yeah, I mean, I think actually Scott is like a Mandelbrot set for talks, because he also filled in recently on the VR meetup. So all we have to do is like plug in a topic, and then you zoom in on Scott, and then you end up with a talk about that topic. I don't know. No one's chiming in with questions. Yeah.
Trying to read back through the log here quick.
In your head. That's.
Well, this is running on a 4K monitor, and it's running about 10,000 iterations per pixel. So no.
Are you sharing your entire monitor?
Yes.
That's interesting. So it's compressing your 4K into probably, I would guess, I don't know, a fourth of a 1080p screen. Like, not very much. And then that's being streamed over Twitch. So I'm sure it's like ugly to look at in the actual end result. I mean, definitely like not as pretty as it would be on your 4K screen for sure.
Yeah, it's actually kind of fun. That's why I sort of got hooked on it. It's like when I started rendering some stuff of my own, I could do it at ridiculously high resolutions, and fractals are kind of amazing in 4K.
Yeah, I'll bet. Sweet. All right. Well, I think next we're gonna take just like a 5-minute break. And if I were like super together, I'd have like some music or something, but I don't. Let's go back to this. Like, here's my head. We could actually let's do this. I've got to be right back. Yeah. So let's say 5 minutes from now would be it'll be 7:12. Maybe let's make it around 7:15. We'll be back for our main speaker. So go get some chips or take a potty break or just chat in the Twitch stream, and we'll see you back at 7:15. Gotta unmute myself. All right, I'm back. And we've got Charlie here. And I'm just going to switch over to the Charlie's screen. And I'll just let him get started. So.
All right. Thanks, Martin.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's good to be here. And I haven't been to IGDA TC in a while. I used to come quite a bit, and then I started playing soccer on Wednesday nights, so sadly I couldn't come. But that's over with for now, so yeah, glad to be here. My topic is related to a passion of mine. Since I was coming to IGDA, I started getting into board game design. And one thing that really fascinates me is how these meaningless little objects like cubes on a board suddenly have so much meaning by the end of a game that people are, laughing, fighting, maybe flipping the table. So I wanted to dive into that a little bit. And I hope that it can also apply to you as video game designers too. Making meaningless objects meaningful, like the portal cube, the companion cube. So, I want to start with this image. If you've never seen it before, it probably just looks like random blobs. And we'll come back to this image in a bit. About me as a game designer, I interned at Fantasy Flight a few years ago, got to work on Star Wars Destiny, the card game, which to my 12-year-old self was like a dream come true. I loved playing Star Wars collectible card game back in the day, and it was amazing to get to work on this game. And since then, I've been working on my own games. They usually have really goofy themes or names, and I try to make some game around it. Dragon insurance, selling insurance to peasants so that if their house burns down by a dragon, I don't know, they'll get money or something. Alphabet Sloop, that was one that I came up with the name first and then figured out a word game around it where your pirates are the consonants and they're trying to get off their sinking boats onto islands that have vowels as the coconuts. And Four Humors is my main game that I've been working on, and it's going to be published with Adam's Apple Games, Adam Rayberg, local publisher here. And we're going to be putting that on Kickstarter at the end of August. So we've been ramping up our art and marketing and everything. And so I'll talk a little about that in a bit. About me, I am, in addition to a board game designer, I'm a film composer. That's kind of my day job these days. And songwriter, a visual artist, and video producer. And so that's me. And this is me, too, I feel like. Don't know if you've seen this episode of Parks and Rec, but Ben is designing the Cones of Dunshire, crazy game. And that's kind of how I feel sometimes with all my creative endeavors, where I throw out all these ideas and people kind of look at me with side eye, like, oh, okay, that's what you're doing. So first, I like to throw this slide in here. The creative brain, what does it look like? Well, part of it is Bob Ross. The part of your brain that says every idea is great, throw everything out there, it's beautiful. And then, as we all know, the other side of the creative brain is Judge Judy, who only wants people to know how stupid they are. And I think that balancing the two sides of the brain is very important as a creator. And so when you're starting your game, you have to have a lot of Bob Ross in you. Every idea is good. Throw it out there, see what happens. And Judge Judy's maybe there in the background, filtering a few things, but mostly letting things happen. Because when you bring your game to the table, that's when the Judge Judys come out, your playtesters. They are always going to point out the flaws. I mean, maybe not always. We're sometimes Minnesota nice about it. but they're thinking it at least. Like, why? What does this game even mean? What are the cones? What are all this is just junk. And you have to be able to roll with the punches with your playtesters and understand that, they don't have the same conception of the game that you do. And to prove that, here's the Dalmatian. And you've seen it before, actually, just a few minutes ago. Now that you've seen the Dalmatian, you can't unsee it from this blob of dots. And I like using this as a metaphor for how you have to think about your game. When you are so close to it, you know the meaning already. But someone who's new coming into it just has no idea, what all these components and objects and rules are really going to mean to them. But the beautiful thing about games, too, is that the meaning evolves as you play. So you might start out a game like Pandemic here with these cubes not meaning anything. But by the end of the game, when you see this cube on Hong Kong, you know that the world could end. And then, there's so much danger in your mind associated with this one single cube. And same with Portal. You start to love this companion cube, and in part because it has a heart on it, but also because it's traveled with you through the course of the game. So taking this metaphor of a cube and seeing where it goes, I like to think of this as the building block of meaning. You're trying to create this cube of meaning with 3 axes, and this is just my hypothesis of what can give a game meaning. And it's something we all strive for because it's going to make our games more engaging and make people want to play it over and over again, and spread your game to their friends because it's so meaningful to them. So the first axis I think of as challenge. Any good game has to have some challenge for you as a player. If it doesn't, it's more of a just fun activity. But everyone wants a little bit of challenge, whether on some scale. So within challenge, I like to think of risk-reward choices. And I think every good game has some element of making meaningful decisions. And usually they're split between a high-risk, high-reward decision and a low-risk, low-reward decision. So I like to think of those as 2 branches to go down. Tension through constraints. That's another big thing. Especially board games, people think, I hate all the rules in this game. But I like to flip that around, and I think of the rules as actually creating the fun of the game. Because every constraint that you put on someone adds tension to their play. And so finding the right balance of rules is interesting, and I'll talk about creating good rules later. And then path to mastery. It's the reason that people play chess their entire lives, and they still get so much out of it. The second axis I think of as appeal, and that to me is it aesthetically pleasing, visually, orally, and does it have, the tactile feel of pieces in a board game that are fun to play around with? Does it have a fun core loop? And what I mean by core loop is what you're doing on your turn. Is what you're doing on your turn fun, or is it more of a task? And, in a video game, the core loop is from moment to moment. What are you actually doing? And is it enjoyable? And then provoking emotion is huge, especially in board games. You need to have some sort of emotion, whether that's a party game like laughing, or just the tension that is created by making a very strategic game. And then the third axis I think of as story. And this is going to fill out our volume of the meaning cube here. And when I think of story, I don't think of just a narrative. I think of it more as what is the entire arc of the game, and how are people thinking about it through time? Do they know what their goal is and what they're aiming for, and are they making progress along the way? So let's look into a couple games and think about these axes of meaning. So Pandemic is one board game that hits on all these things. It's starting with appeal. It's aesthetically pleasing. It's not the most amazing art, but it's got, very clean graphics. Fun core loop. You're going around the board, cleaning up cubes. I mean, that's at its base level kind of like a human instinct to want to clean up stuff and organize things. And it definitely provokes emotion. If you've ever played the game, sometimes it comes down to that final card you draw as to whether the world will be overrun by these diseases. And I think it's probably right now the best selling it's ever been, sadly. But the challenge side, there's always risk-reward choices in Pandemic. Like, do you risk it and let one of these places that has 3 cubes go for another turn so that you can do something else and hope it doesn't get exploded onto everything else? And tension through constraints. Pandemic's a good example of a game that uses action points. So on your turn, you have 4 actions to do. And that's the constraint that causes all this tension because you only have limited time and resources to do things with. So the path to mastery, every game you play, you're trying to get better at playing. And the cool thing about Pandemic is now they have Pandemic Legacy, which is a campaign version of it, where you play multiple games and the story changes as you go. And leading us into the story part, the cool thing about the Legacy is that not only do you have a game arc of the single game, but you have the entire game series that you're trying to play through. So that's something good to think about when you're designing your game. Not only the full game arc, but what are the mini arcs that players are thinking about and aiming at. And clear goals. In Pandemic, you're trying to, save the world. And feeling of progress. Every time you clear some cubes, you feel like you're making progress. Switching over to video game side, Portal. Again, it hits on all these points. Aesthetically pleasing, fun core loop. You're trying to, figure out each of these puzzles, and every time you solve a puzzle, you advance a little further. Provoking emotion. Again, even like a meaningless object can make you feel sad when you have to. Well, I won't spoil anything, but you've probably, a lot of you played Portal. And challenge-wise, risk-reward choices. I do think this is one segment that video games could learn from board games a little bit. You are making choices, but I feel like video games, sometimes they're not always meaningful because you end up being on the same train tracks throughout the game, especially like when you're having a conversation with a non-player character. They it usually goes in one direction. But, it's hard to code multiple decision branches, so that is understandable. Tension through constraints, too. I mean, as in board games, Portal has the rules of the universe, and the tension comes from trying to get around those. And one other note, sometimes having constraints on players is great because then when they do get to break through that constraint, it's such a good feeling. Like they get a power-up that lets them suddenly fly, something like that. Real exciting. And path to mastery, of course. Yep, you're trying to get better at the game. And Portal, it's not the most amazing storyline, but there's enough of these little hints of something going on in the background that are so cool, and it's almost more just like visual clues, not necessarily someone telling you what's going on. I love that about that game. Clear goals, feeling of progress as you advance through the levels. So with that, I want to talk about Four Humors. I've been working on this game idea for 4 to 5 years. I just love the concept of the medieval humors, and they used to think that, your body fluids would change your personality. So, for example, if you have too much yellow bile in you, you'll become aggressive and dominant. But if you have too much blood, you'll be friendly and extroverted and creative. If you have too much black bile, you'll be melancholic, meaning you're introverted and perfectionistic. And if you have too much phlegm, you'll become patient and submissive. So I went through so many different designs for this game over those years, and none of them were really hitting this theme exactly like I wanted until I came up with this version of the game. And it looks very simple. There's not really much wording other than these location names and your characters. And so each of these locations is things you're trying to win by placing your cubes down on these characters. And you'll see that each of the characters has kind of a split personality. So the knights could be either choleric, yellow, meaning they're dominant, or submissive as white, meaning phlegmatic. So how it works, everyone places down matching the colors secretly, and then they're all revealed. And when they're revealed, you check the hierarchy of the humors. And my idea was to just make a simple system of resolution that would match the personalities. So on top, we have the dominant cholerics. And they're trying to win with only one yellow on the card. If there's a second yellow, then they kill each other. And then you move down the line to sanguines. And sanguines are trying to work with another sanguine because they're the friendly extroverts. So these peasants, if both of them were red, they would win the card together. So there's elements of table talk with other players, like, hey, let's work together, we can win this card. If there's only one sanguine, though, they don't find a friend, and we move down to the melancholic. So the melancholic personality, being the perfectionists they are, they either want exactly 2, or if there's 1, because they're introverted, they have a special power to withdraw. And that's kind of a bonus action in this game. And then at the bottom are the patient phlegmatics. They're kind of just waiting around for everyone else to not win, and then all the phlegmatics can win together. So, looking at a single card, this card is an example of a game theory principle. And all these cards kind of have a different amount of game theory, meaning like how you interact with other people and a little bit of politicking in terms of how you decide to play out these cards. And so this card represents the prisoner's dilemma. If you've never heard of that before, it's a concept where 2 people are going to prison, and if they both squeal on each other, they'll go to prison for life. But if only one person squeals, they get out scot-free and the other person goes to prison. But if both of them work together and they don't say anything, then they'll both only have to go to prison for a year. So if they were able to communicate, they might work out a deal. Okay, we're both going to prison for a year, no big deal. But, we at least won't screw each other over. And this card is kind of the perfect example of that. Because let's say I play my cube down, and you're deciding what you want to play. Now I could tell you, hey, we're working together. I put down a red. We're going to be friends. And so you make your choice. And turns out I was telling the truth. Okay, I wanted to work together, but turns out you screwed me over. So you win the card as a single yellow, and I get nothing. And this game would be fun for about 2 seconds, if that's all it was. But what I did, instead of just cards like this, is we have actually 4 cards out at any given time. So instead of just deciding to play here on one of these nobles, you can play on any of these characters. So the game becomes more about the efficient way to use your tokens, and you're making these choices that way. So back to the block of meaning. So far I have a pretty good challenge for players. There's risk-reward choices. There's tension through constraints, because you can only do one thing on your turn, and your tokens are limited to where they go. And there's a path to mastery, because the more you play the game, the more you'll understand what's the best method to play on the battlegrounds, for example, or the bedchamber, or divining chamber. But it's so far not super appealing looking. It's kind of cute, but at this point, I wanted to work with my publisher, Adam's Apple Games, to make the art awesome for each of these scenes. And so Adam asked me to be art director, which I was super thrilled about. And I was working with an illustrator that he knew in China, Shirley Gan. And actually, if you know Martin's game Thrive, she did the cover for that, and she's awesome. So I started out with some sketches myself. I had always wanted to be a cartoonist growing up, so this was like also a dream for me to try out these cards. Tried a few different styles, as you can see on the bedchamber here. I had so many little Easter eggs, like a little poison bottle here hiding behind the wine, a little book here that says how to stab and got the dagger behind the back, and all this little Easter eggs of a little rat there. Basically, I wanted to combine Where's Waldo with Monty Python and the Holy Grail. And so I was making all these cartoonish versions, but it wasn't quite hitting the medieval style that we really wanted to go for. And also some of it was looking too much like the Burger King, and I wanted to get away from that. So I started working with Shirley on it, and I would give her these really rough sketches of all the scenes I wanted to do, and she would come back with this. And I really love her art style, because it's like a combo of kind of flat medieval look with like a fresh cartoony style too. And she pretty much translated really well, like all these scenes that I had in my head. So let's dive into how she started. So I gave her, I started with these simple drawings. Then I tried kind of a flat medieval look as an example for her. And she started with doing some character sketches, because we wanted to make sure the characters looked great. And so she would do a bunch of different options for me. And then I would say, like, oh, I like the kind of clothes look of this character, plus the face of this character is really cute. And so she would take that and do some more rough sketches, and then if I approved that, she'd do line drawings. And I liked them, but they still didn't feel quite like we were hitting the medieval style that I was hoping for. So I asked her to do a few more sketches based on this kind of cool flat face. And we settled on kind of a look like this. So she then started doing the Heathen Bonfire as the first card, and she tried both horizontal and vertical, and we decided vertical looked a little cooler. And she did the other characters in the meantime, just to make sure those characters looked neat. And here's her second to last and final art. And I just was really loving her style. And I would also give her these like little Easter egg things. So originally I said, well, let's just do some random notes. And then I thought, well, I'm a composer. How could I put just random notes? I got to come up with a actual song. So this is like a tritone, the devil's interval. So there's a little Easter egg on all those music cards. Wherever there's a bard, there's some music playing. Another example of a card and how it progressed. So this was my initial line art that I liked, but it was a little too cartoony, and just the faces were too small when you actually played the game to see what was going on. And so I tried another version that was a little more flat, but something didn't feel like that awesome about the card. And then Shirley did a great job with the final style. Another card here. This one I almost went a little too simplistic because ended up, kind of a bland background. So then I would go one more round of revisions where I just did some sketches myself. I wanted to have, a nice platform, some candles, and then the stained glass windows. I spent a long time making some scenes based on the humors here, so kind of like biblical scenes related to each of the humors. And then Shirley just made them even more awesome. And I'll just go through a few more cards because it's fun. And, Monty Python, this is our essential Monty Python card. The sorcerer guarding the bridge, and we even put in a few swallows. So I think all these little Easter eggs are going to really sell the game for people. And the Sacred Swamp, the Royal Resort. And one thing about the art too, I wanted it to not be necessarily just like goofy cartoon faces. I wanted it to look kind of like a serious medieval painting with goofy things going on in them. So that was one of the goals with the art direction. Again, more music. And another Monty Python reference. And finally, the Royal Latrine, one of my favorite cards. This is an example of a card where you can work together either way to clean the latrine. It just depends on how passionate you are with the sanguine, or if you're a little bit more submissive and lazy with the phlegmatics. So now I have appeal is working in these cards, but I'm kind of missing the story, the game arc. Where are people going with all this? They're playing tokens on cards, but what happens when they win the card? And what's their overall goal? This is the part that actually took a long time, over a year almost, to figure out. The first thing I tried was kind of just basic point trackers and kind of a race track element. Even tried a Candyland style version at one point. The advantage is it's easy to see who's winning when it's on a track, and it doesn't really distract from gameplay. You don't have to focus too much on that. But the cons are it's not very strategic, and it's not very thematic. So in the end, the Candyland version, people hated because it just didn't have anything that was giving them a spark. So I tried next area majority. Now, area majority is let's say if you have the most cubes in one area, you win the whole thing. So in the castle, for example, green player has 3 tokens, so they would get all 7 points. So the pros are it does create a lot of tension out of this all or nothing win, and you can create thematic areas on the art, castle, mountain, etc. But I realized one of the cons was, at least in my game, the player in the lead tends to stay there and it's kind of hard to surpass them once they have a good lead. So that wasn't going to work. So I thought, well, let's ditch the exterior things beyond the cards themselves, and we'll just do set collection. Meaning, if they win 3 cards that have mountains on them, then they win the game. The pros of this version is the cards have dynamic values, so let's say you already won 2 mountain cards, then this 3rd mountain card becomes super important. And you don't need to count points. Before I had like points on the cards, and then you'd count them all at the end, which took too long. But the cons are that it's really not that thematic to just collect 3 of a certain kind. And it's not a super exciting game arc. It's kind of like, well, I got 2 and now I got 3. Well, game over. So I wasn't digging that version. So I also tried map connections. And this version actually was the version that sold the publisher on it, even though it's like a really crappy hand-drawn map. The cool thing about the map was, there's more strategy to where your pieces are going. It's more thematic because you can have actual area for all the cards. So the royal bedchamber is up here in the castle, and so people feel like they're actually progressing on a map. And again, you don't really need points. So I used to have points on the map, and then I switched over to not having points, and it's more about the connections. The con is that it's sometimes information overload. To look at the map, you can't really tell who's winning easily. But as strategic gamers go, they can handle map things, and it's sometimes kind of fun to puzzle it out. So finally, this is what our final version of the game is going to look like. I went for a route of having a map with objective cards. And the way you win the game is by being the first to get 2 objective cards to end the game. And the advantages of this is, you can switch out these objective cards. So I actually, on the backs of each of them, I have alternate objectives. There's no point counting, other than, you're counting to make sure you got into 6 regions for this card. And, the end of the game is real quick. It's kind of an exciting race to get these goals finished. And you can also allow for multiple strategies. Like, let's say one person really likes going for bridge connections, while another person really likes working together with other players to get 6 sites with multiple tokens. And the only real con, again, is information overload. So, in addition to that map version, I kept thinking about other ways to play the game. And I thought about each player having their own personal map, or, a team version where you're trying to storm the castle with your team, while the nobles are trying to defend their castle. And I tried this method of branching paths. So when you win a token, for example, you get to place it next to a token you already have. And the advantage of this is it is strategic, it's thematic, because you can have, your tokens are climbing up the ladder to the top of the castle. And there's constrained decision making, meaning I'm not looking at the entire board, I'm only looking at the slots that are right next to my other slots. So it's a little bit of it reduces the information overload. But the major con that I realized in this method is that players were feeling stuck. Like, sometimes their wins, when they won with a token, it was meaningless. So I didn't really pursue that too much longer. And instead, the version that I ended up choosing for the alternate way to play the game is a bingo board. The advantage is it's easy to make shape-based goals. So 5 in a row would win a goal. It's spatially compact, and it's pretty familiar for people who are new to a game. They've played bingo before, they kind of know how to win at that. The con here is that it just kind of looks simplistic, so people might think, oh, there's not much strategy, it's just like bingo. But this is how that mode turned out. So everyone has their own fiefdom map, which is actually on the back side of the other map that you saw, the 6-part map, splits off into 6 individual fiefdoms. And the game plays the same way, except that instead of the location mattering, it's now about which characters you win with. So I might try to win with a peasant, and to put them on my peasant map here. And then the goals are pretty straightforward, just making shapes and other things like that. So that's one piece of advice for when you do want to make like an alternate mode of play. Is there a way that people can do it that they don't have to learn a whole new system? They can just switch over by, like, sometimes literally just flipping over game pieces to make it work. So now I think I had hit all the elements of the building block of meaning. Now that we have a story and some sort of game arc, the goals that people are going for, and they feel like they're making progress on the board. So that's where For Humors is at right now. We're getting ready for Kickstarter, like I said, and we're going to put Tabletop Simulator. We have a mod for it that's going to be public soon. So if you want to try it out, you can go to forhumorsgame.com and sign up for our mailing list, and we'll let you know when that's online. And yeah, Tabletop Simulator, if you haven't tried it yet, it's awesome. You can play any game you want. And if you're into doing board game design, it's a great way to get your game out there right now, because there's a lot of playtesters online with COVID and everything. That's kind of the only way to get some games played. And you're welcome to connect with me too. I have my info there. But that's not all, because I do think I have some more time here. And Martin, you can stop me if I'm going over. But I did want to talk about rules a bit. And it's something that doesn't apply quite as much to video game design, because the video game rule set is in the code. Players don't really have to deal with the rules in a conscious way. Versus if you're interested in getting into board game design, I think that's one of the main things you have to be thinking about, because it's such a barrier for people sometimes. If they see your rule book more than like 2 pages, sometimes that's too much. So I want to talk about what makes for good rules. And first off, obviously you want your game to be fun. And so with every rule you make, think about, is this rule creating more fun than the rule itself? Like, does the fun outweigh the amount of time someone's going to spend thinking about the rule? And what makes for a light rule? Well, the biggest thing is, if it's intuitive, then it's going to be a light rule. If it matches the theme, for example, Agricola, I have friends who are not gamers at all, but they have gotten into this game, even though it's like a 3-hour endeavor. But they love it because everything makes sense. Like, you're building fences around sheep, and then if you have 2 sheep, they make a baby sheep. Everything makes intuitive sense. Also, if everything matches the expected game flow, so like Roll for the Galaxy, there's a lot of things to think about, but they happen in kind of a logical order. So first you're going out and exploring the universe, then you're developing technology, then you're settling different places in the universe, and then you're producing, and then you're shipping those goods off. So it all makes sense. If your game rule matches other games, that's going to help a lot. So Dominion kind of started the craze of deck builder games, and every game since then, if it's a deck builder, is kind of expected to have the rule of drawing 5 cards. I'm not sure exactly why they picked 5, but it seems great. And you probably want to go along with that if you're making a deck builder, just so there's not a hurdle for someone. And it's great when the components reinforce the rules. Scythe is a really well-designed game where the board actually has insets where you put all your pieces, and then when you move a piece, it reveals something underneath that's now relevant. So the irrelevant information is covered up at the beginning, and yeah, it's just a beautifully designed game. Now, if the rules outweigh the fun, how does that work? Well, if it's a heavy rule, playtesters probably always forget it. If you're noticing your playtesters forgetting a rule, probably change that rule. If you can't easily explain it in writing, unfortunately, writing and a rulebook is the main way that people are going to access your game for a board game. So make sure you can explain it in writing, or maybe cut it. Also, if it's an edge case where it only happens once per game, try to avoid those, if at all possible. And if the rule is counterintuitive, that's going to be a heavy rule. For example, Hanabi, don't look at your cards. Now, that game, for sure, the first time you play, you're going to be tempted to pick up your hand and look at your cards. But the whole idea of the game is that you can't see your own cards. So actually, a few counterintuitive rules can make your game stand out. So if there is a rule like that, make sure it's really the focus of the entire game. And that'll be more fun for players. So in addition to having fun, you also want some strategy in your game, right? So if your strategy outweighs the rules, that's usually a good thing. And this comes into emergent complexity versus innate complexity. So what that means is, emergent complexity, the rules are very light, but the strategy is vast with this game. So chess, for example, all you have to learn is the rules of how the pieces move, and then it's the interactions of those pieces that adds to this great amount of strategy. Versus innate complexity, for example, the Cones of Dunshire, the game where the rules are ridiculous, and who knows, maybe there's probably strategy with that game, but it's probably buried behind pages and pages of rules. And when I was working on the game Star Wars Destiny, we had a breakthrough moment where we switched from innate complexity of having phases in your turn. Your turn, you start out by rolling your dice, and then you have like a pay for things phase, you have a battle phase where you challenge someone else, you have like a defending phase, all these phases to remember. And one day the designer, Lucas Litzinger, came back and said, I fixed it, I made the game better. And it truly was a lot better when he switched to single action turns. So like a chess game, you go back and forth with your opponent, and instead of resolving all your dice at once, you roll them out, and then you have to decide which ones you want to resolve. So it's all about efficiency. And there's a lot of tension there because you're waiting to see, do I risk it and keep my dice out there, or will my opponent kill my character before I can use those dice? So that was a huge inspiration for me in my own games. For example, for Humors, I switched to single action turns. Well, I guess it was always single action turns, but the tension there is that you can only put one token down on a turn, so you have to make it count. And you're hoping to, make something happen by the time it gets back around to you. And no one else took your chances away of winning. Magic the Gathering is another example of emergent complexity. So each card in and of itself isn't super complex, but when you start combining them, you get some really amazing combos, and that's the whole appeal of the game, is putting a deck together with simple parts. The advantages of emergent complexity It's fairly easy to learn because once you learn the basic rules, everything else will follow. It's very strategic, and you feel clever when you come up with a cool combo. The disadvantage is that there can be rules questions that you don't know how to solve. There's thousands and thousands of magic cards, and you know that there's just going to be some weird combos that no one can really resolve how they should play out. Innate complexity does have its place. I don't want to say that it's not a good thing, because sometimes games like Betrayal at House on the Hill need a lot of rules. So the advantage from all these rules is that it feels more thematic. So if you haven't played this game, everyone's working together until one person becomes the betrayer, and then they have to go through, and there's a book of random betrayer scenarios that you read through. And one of them is like you become a vampire, one is maybe like you're a mummy or something. And the advantage of a lot of rules there is that it does feel really thematic when each of these different scenarios plays out. The disadvantage, lots of rules. People don't always like reading rules, but that's what we get for that game. And finally, I just want to talk a little about how board games relate to video games and what each can learn from the other. So board games excel at human interaction. That's what makes most tabletop games work, is people playing around the table. It's easier to do bluffing, in person. It's more fun. Negotiation, in person, always fun. And role-playing. The physicality of play with board games, it's really easy to put some components on the table and people can instantly be playing with them. Versus video games, there's always going to be this hurdle when you're developing of a lot of work goes into just making the pieces play well together. And board games, sometimes you have to use your imagination quite a bit. So like Dungeons and Dragons, for example, or any game where it's more of like a story going on outside just the pieces on the table. And not that video games can't be imaginative, of course, but you're kind of fed the story through sensory immersion and everything else that's going on. So it's less of an imaginative act, it's more like an experience. So the sensory immersion leads to a range of emotions. So like board games, the emotions are usually laughter, tension, maybe some anger. But there's not really necessarily a game that's going to make you cry. I think they can exist, but video games excel at that kind of emotion because they actually share more in common with films in some cases, and the music and the story itself can really draw you in. Video games exceed at hidden information. You can hide a lot under the hood story-wise, versus in a board game, if you want to make a story game, you kind of have to have a deck of cards maybe, and you flip through them to reveal what the story is. But that's the nice thing about video games, is all this hidden information that you can reveal to players. Solo play, obviously video games have been doing that well for a long time. Simultaneous play as well is not something easy to do in a board game that is just natural for video games. And finally, the rules in video games, they are coded in. People learn the rules as they play, the rules of the universe. And lessons that board games can learn from video games, maybe using audio and music. More games are including like an app that you can have some music on in the background as a timer, things like that, or prompts coming from a phone app. Board games are also becoming better at creating AI systems for solo play. I'm not necessarily a solo board game player, but there's a huge crowd for that now. Simultaneous play, also another lesson learned from video games. People don't always want to wait around 15 minutes to get back to their turn. So anything you can do in a board game where people are doing things at the same time can be really fun. And players learn the rules as they play. That's something that would be lovely to get into more board games. It's not always easy to do, but the game Charterstone is a good example of this, because you start out with a blank map. And this is another legacy game. Like I was talking about with Pandemic, you play multiple games of the same game. And as you play, you unlock stickers that you actually sticker onto the map of like inns and factories and stuff. And the other thing is you unlock stickers for rules, and you actually stick those into the rule book. So you're learning the base game is really easy, and then you gradually get introduced to more and more complex rules. And video games can learn some lessons from board games. More meaningful choices. Like I was saying before, it's obviously a lot to code in lots of branching paths, but something to think about when you're making a video game. Like, is there really a meaningful choice that this player is making in this level, or are they just kind of on a track? Human interactions in VR. Learning about what in-game objects are going to be doing, and the physicality of board games. People have been trying to perfect that for many, many years. And also leaving some things up to the player's imagination. I think maybe sometimes in video games they try to give you everything, but Slender, for example, one of the freakiest games ever created, gives you almost nothing. You're just using your flashlight in the woods, and it's the darkness around you, and not knowing where Slender Man is that is the freakiest part of that entire game. So think about how maybe that could be incorporated not just in a horror game, but in other games. What's beyond the view of the player? So that's my talk. I will leave you with some board game design resources, my favorite books and podcasts about it. And again, there's my info. Feel free to connect on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever. But thank you so much for listening. Great to be here once again.
Thank you, Charlie. Awesome to have you on here. Does anyone have any questions for Charlie? Anyone who's watching? We'll give people like a minute or two and see if anyone has any specific. Sure. I should have prepared one.
No, it's all right.
How has it been to work with someone in China? Like the communication?
It's awesome. So Shirley, there's a little bit of a language barrier, but she actually studied art in the U.S., so she's got a really good grasp. And it was kind of fun because I'd send her a sketch, and then overnight, because she's in China, she'd come up with something, and she was super efficient and fast. So, yeah, that was a treat.
Yeah. Lane had a question. He said that you mentioned that some people maybe Minnesota nice while testing. Have you found any good ways to open more people up to being willing to lob some honest criticism?
Sure. I think one of my publisher friends, Carla Kopp, has something she says to her playtesters, which is, don't you just hate this part of the game? So that they'll start in that mindset of like, oh, okay, I get that the designer's okay with me saying bad stuff about the game. Because really, it is you do want to hear the bad stuff. Like, you do want to hear which pieces were fun for people, because that can help you focus on what's the fun part. But it's really the critiques that are going to help make your game better.
Don't you just hate this whole game? Doesn't it suck?
Yeah. What? Well, here's a question for I've never really play tested a video game. How do you do that, Martin?
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, I think it's exactly the same. You just watch them play, right? So I think the important thing with any play test is to sort of be able to watch the person while they're doing the playing. So it's almost less about the game itself than it is about like their reactions and anything. So you can kind of see like if they're stumbling over something or if they're having problems with something. Well, I mean, you can watch their play as well because you'll notice things that they're doing that you didn't intend, right? But like,
Sure.
I almost feel like watching them is as valuable or more valuable than watching the actual play.
Yeah.
So
I think I think board games is more. You do have to ask a lot of questions afterwards because sometimes like a lot of strategy games, for example, you could watch what they're doing, but what they're thinking is totally different from what's the expression on their face, for example. Like sometimes I've played games of Four Humors, which normally I try to get people talking and laughing, having fun. But there's games I played where people are dead silent; they don't want to say anything, and as a tester, I feel like, this is not going well. But then at the end of the game, everyone's like, "Oh, I love that game. This is great." So sometimes you just have to dig a little deeper and not assume you know what people are thinking.
Yeah.
Which is a good lesson in life in general.
Yeah, that's true of all things, right? I will say one other difference too is that like with a video game, I mean, I guess like it depends on the kind of video game, but like if it's a single player game, you often ask them to talk while they're playing, right? So you actually get their sort of internal monologue externally, and that's
nice.
Super helpful. So you can kind of do that a little bit with board games. Like I've played a lot of 2-player games where we're like, okay, we'll just say our strategies, like as as it's your turn, why don't you say what you're thinking about and like what decisions you're making, and that can be really helpful too.
I like that. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I don't see any other questions. Just jokes in the.
All right. Sounds good. Yeah, I'm seeing that too. Thanks, Lane, for the comments.
Yeah. So I guess like we're probably gonna wrap up, and there'll definitely be some Discord chat going on. Maybe some games. Oh, it's Adam had a question.
Hey, my publisher, Adam Rayberg.
Would you do art direction again with a future game?
Good question. I think I would. It's really fun. It's a lot of work. Obviously, I'll be doing the art direction for future Four Humors expansions because that would be obviously got to continue that. But yeah. Well.
That's right. This was your opportunity to be like, well, I would need some more money.
Yeah. I'll hold Adam hostage right here publicly on... No,
that's right. Like, I don't know if it was worth it.
No, we're already talking about like expansions a little bit and got some ideas for those. So we'll see. We'll see. But
I mean, the Kickstarter hasn't even launched yet, right? Like
it hasn't. No, but we need some stretch goal material.
That's right.
Possibly. Yep.
Well, I've played it. I know a bunch of people in chat had too. It's such a great game. I'm looking forward to backing it and getting that. So.
Thanks.
I love all the Easter eggs.
Excited to get it out there.
That's just so great. I had no idea that there was so much in them. I've seen some of the art just like in various stages and had no idea that there was all that stuff in there. So that's exciting.
Oh yeah. Well, I've been working on it for a while, so I've been thinking about this stuff quite a bit.
Awesome. All right, Are you going to stick around and chat?
Yeah, sounds good.
Cool. Well, hopefully we'll see a bunch of people over there. So thanks for watching, everyone, and have a good night.